Morning.
Morning.
Welcome all to our
Thank
press
you.
conference to discuss the Corruption Perceptions Index. And I'm Rosalie Hamilton. I am a board director of the National Integrity Action. And with me is
Danielle Archer. I'm not a board member for NIA.
And we're filling in for Chairman Faye Ellington, who's unable to make it. She really wanted to be here, but couldn't be here. And we do want to make a special welcome to representatives of the diplomatic community who are here with us, members of the press, and we have NIA advocates and others who are here. Thank you for taking the time to be with us this morning. Now, I know that it's a very busy time and many of us have appointments and have to leave very shortly. So I'm going to hand over right now to our Principal Director, Professor Trevor Monroe, who will take you through the index and give you all the highlights. Over to you, Trevor.
Good morning, Rosalie. Good morning, Danielle. Good to see you both. And may I join you in welcoming each and every one who is
so
with
we're
us
not
this morning.
seeing, we have a little technical challenge here, not seeing Trevor. And
good morning, everybody. Good morning, Rosalie. Good morning, Director Danielle. Good to be with you this morning. I hope you're now seeing me.
Yes, we are.
Okay, thank you. And I also want to join in welcoming so many of our friends in the media who are here this morning. I know they have a very tight schedule. The Public Accounts Committee of the Parliament meets at 10 o'clock. I want to welcome our international development partners. I see our friend from the US Embassy in Kingston. I see our friend from the United Kingdom High Commission. And I'm sure our friends from the European Union will be joining us very soon. I also want to extend a special welcome to our partners in the public agencies who are involved in the combat of corruption. I see representatives from the major organized crime anti-corruption agency, and also very importantly, from the Auditor General's Department of Jamaica. Significantly, we see as well our partners in the diaspora. I want to especially welcome Dr. Rupert Francis, who is the chairman of the Jamaica Anti-Crime Diaspora Task Force, who of course is seeking to motivate and mobilize our friends, Jamaicans who love our country so much, to get involved in strengthening good governance and in ensuring that our people pass through this crisis of the economy, the crisis of crime, the crisis of corruption, and of course, the crisis of COVID. May I begin briefly by reminding ourselves what is corruption? Quite simply, it is the abuse of position, whether the position is that of a minister or a politician, the position is that of a businessman or a permanent secretary or a member of a board of a public body or a private body. And of course, whether you are a contractor or a private businessman making contributions to political parties, it is the abuse of office, of entrusted office for illicit private gain or for gain of your friends or family or your political organization. That's what we're about. And of course, on this day when the Corruption Perception Index is launched, we need to remind ourselves that corruption, so defined, is a global problem. It's a problem of big countries and small countries, of rich countries and poor countries, of developing and developed. And in that context, of course, Jamaica is seriously troubled by organized crime and corruption. In fact, the global economy, it is estimated, loses about 5% each year, over $2.5 trillion. And we in Jamaica, regrettably, are aligned with that, in that our estimates from the National Security Policy, a very important document of 2014, is that we're losing approximately 5% of our gross domestic product each year, going into the pockets of the corrupt, being wastefully spended, instead of providing the social services which we are so sorely in need of. In fact, the estimate is that 100 billion Jamaican dollars is what we're losing each day. Can you imagine what that would do in terms of properly paying our health workers who are so stressed now, or police officers who are in dire need, our teachers? How much, even if we cut that 100 billion to 25 billion, if we cut it down, that could do so much to ensure that our public officers are properly paid, and indeed that the early childhood education process, which needs so much to be strengthened, that could also be dealt with in a meaningful way. So everyone, all of us, whether wealthy or not, middle class, most of all those of the bottom of our society, have a vested interest in ensuring that we reduce the levels of corruption and that we punish those who would steal from our national pot. And so to speak, that's why we're here this morning. So we remind you as well, not only what is corruption, but what is the Corruption Perception Index. Basically, it is the most used, the most authoritative global measure of perceptions of corruption, launched each year in Berlin last night, early this morning, by Transparency International, which is a leading non-governmental organization combating corruption in countries around the world. And National Integrity Action, as many of you know, is the Jamaican chapter, one of 100 different chapters in various countries around the world. And what the Corruption Perception Index does is to score, first of all, and to rank of 180 countries according to the perceived levels of corruption as determined by experts, as determined by business people, as determined by very rigorous methodological surveys. In fact, there are 13 data sources which provide the material for the experts in Transparency International to aggregate the data and to average it in order to give us scores and ranking. Economic Intelligence Unit, the World Economic Forum, the World Justice Rule of Law Project, these are all a few of the 13 different bodies that contribute to the scores and ranks. In that context, we obviously recognize that perception is not necessarily reality, because corruption is generally comprised of deliberately hidden illegal activities. Bribery, for example, the diversion of public funds to private pockets. And these come to light arising from investigations and scandals, and of course, prosecutions. But measuring these important elements, like how many persons are prosecuted for bribery or corruption, may not measure the extent of it, because it may in fact simply indicate the degree of professionalism and technical capability of those different agencies. So perception is a measure which accompanies those, which complements them, and which, as I said before, all over the world today, countries are concerned, public officials, citizens, as to where their country ranks. So may I say that Jamaica's score and rank on the Corruption Perception Index 2021 reflects hard-won gains. It reflects positive as well achievements. But on the other hand, deeply disappointing deficits in our combat of corruption. The positives include many issues called for by NIA in last year's review of the 2020 Perception Index, gains that we struggled for along with others during the course of the year. These are, I mentioned, three, the most important. First of all, the major organized crime anti-corruption agency in 2021 became finally and fully independent. Finally and fully independent, having the status of a national crime agency in the UK or the FBI in the United States, independent of the JCF. And that was a major step forward, which many have been working for over the last few years. The second really major important gain, achievement in 2021 were the regulations. The regulations passed by the House and the Senate after many attempts, led by the Minister of Finance, regulations to the Public Bodies Management Accountability Act, which now require merit-based appointment to the boards, 160 odd different boards which manage billions and billions of dollars of our taxpayers' money. So that no longer will the age-old practice of nepotism, cronyism, political favoritism, no longer will those be the main or even any element in the appointment to these public boards. This represented a major blow to aspects of Jamaica's tribal political culture. Thirdly, there were important steps, and I do emphasize first steps, towards greater accountability. Accountability in terms of the members of boards and public bodies, public officers found in breach of law, taking that first step to be either fired or to resign. And that represented an important step forward. And maybe also mention that for the first time, perhaps in the Caribbean, certainly in Jamaica, the entire cabinet undertook 10 different workshops led by the Integrity Commission of Jamaica in corruption and anti-corruption measures. And of course, learning those processes is not the same thing as applying them, but at least to understand them is a step forward. For these gains, we have to acknowledge significant efforts by 5 different components of our society. First of all, we have to commend the efforts of our investigative journalists. Absolutely sterling. And we humbly take some pride in the fact that we have participated in the training of investigative journalists with the Media Institute of the Caribbean and other entities over the years. But would we have known so much about Nutrition Products Limited, the abuses there, the Airports Authority of Jamaica, the Clarion and Lumina partners, had it not been for the work of our investigative journalists, many of whose colleagues are here with us this morning. Secondly, the Auditor General's Office. We have to commend that office, its leadership, and Pamela Monroe Ellis, the Auditor General, apologizes for her absence this morning. She has to be attending the Public Accounts Committee. Their performance reports over the year were outstanding. In particular, the assessment, the investigation into the Joint Committee of Tertiary Education reflected serious abuses, leading to the recommendation that the acting permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education should be punished as a result. And in fact, the issue of a surcharge being imposed on her is now being probed by the Financial Secretary's office. Thirdly, our investigators in MOCA, who are represented here, in the Financial Investigations Division and Integrity Commission, they too need to be commended. Not least of all, fourthly, members of Parliament, of the Political Directorate, Cabinet, on both sides of the House, had to stand up to other colleagues who resisted the advance of good governance measures. So we have to say that those who stood up need to be appreciated for their efforts, particularly in ensuring that the regulations against cronyism and nepotism in the Public Bodies Management Act are now passed. And finally, but not least of all, civil society organizations, those represented in the Consensus Monitoring Oversight Committee, such as NIA, our chairman in CMOC, Lloyd Distant, I believe, is with us now, and we welcome him. The newly formed community advocacy groups, combination of citizens association standing up for good governance in the building and real estate developments, which threaten to turn so much of our country into a concrete jungle in abuse of building regulations and building approvals. JAMP, our colleague, and so many others. We note that the Archbishop Ken Richards, the head of the JCC, should be with us this morning, and the church is now playing a more active role in taking on issues of good governance and anti-corruption. So efforts were good, but nevertheless, not strong enough to deal with serious deficits which remain in our good governance architecture. These efforts were not enough to overcome in 2021 a number of critical shortfalls in our system. And I want to mention 3 of these, which are crucial for the future. First of all, the continued impunity of lawbreakers in high places. I want to mention one. Specifically, the officers in those public bodies who are in chronic breach of procurement law, and even more so of the Public Bodies Management Accountability Act. That act requires that each of these public bodies spending millions and hundreds of millions of our money should report annually to Parliament within 3 months of the end of the parliamentary year, so that we know what they've been doing, we know how they've spent their money. Would you believe, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, or friends in the international community, that the December report, the December tabulation of the compliance of public bodies with the reporting requirements of the law reveal that approximately 1/4 of the 161 bodies reported on were in breach of this requirement of transparency and accountability. Some were outstandingly in compliance. Let us mention those: the Broadcasting Commission of Jamaica, the Jamaica Mortgage Bank. But others are in breach, some going back as far as 10, 12 years. Many of our regional health authorities have not been reporting regularly, the National Works Agency similarly. This is a clear violation of the rule of law in high places. We were not able to get this rectified, and this remains an outstanding goal for 2022. Then, of course, there was an unacceptable delay in the fulfillment of anti-corruption and anti-crime agreements arrived at in the Consensus Management Oversight Committee. That was an agreement after many months of negotiation, arrived at in August 2020. 2 of the critical elements were not done or not achieved on target in accordance with the timelines in 2021. These were the unexplained wealth orders, which would allow our courts to issue such orders as they do in the United Kingdom to facilitate those with illicit wealth having the burden of explaining where they got it from. That unexplained wealth order requirement, which probably would need an amendment to the Proceeds of Crime Act, in fact, that's what it requires, or a constitutional amendment, remains to be done. Similarly, if not more importantly, the Enhanced Security Measures Act, ESMO, which should have been laid in Parliament to ensure that our security forces have the authority and strength to deal with the gangs more effectively and the gunmen and the violence producers. That ESMO still is not amongst the government of Jamaica's priorities in the latest listing of the legislative priorities. This is a major shortcoming which has to be rectified. And then, of course, thirdly, the resistance to greater transparency and accountability, which has been recommended by the Integrity Commission for the Integrity Commission, in particular, the gag order, which the law places on that commission from telling the public of Jamaica when it undertakes an investigation of some importance. For example, I mentioned two areas that we still know nothing about. The Auditor General recommended that the Acting Permanent Secretary and the Minister of Education, the issues there be turned over to our anti-corruption agencies. Jamaica does not know because the law prohibits the Integrity Commission from telling us whether they are taking up that call from the Auditor General to investigate that particular issue. Some years ago, the contract awarding fire trucks represented an important complaint which was lodged with the Integrity Commission in 2020. We still do not know whether an investigation is taking place. This is an important measure that has to be amended if our public is not to be kept in the dark and to wonder, in fact, whether the Integrity Commission is doing what it ought to be. So when we match the positives as a result of great effort and the deficits, it turns out that on Corruption Perception Index 2021, Jamaica is literally found to be standing still, to be marking time, to be treading water beneath the surface of integrity. What do we mean by this? On a score of 0 to 100, where 0 represents the most corrupt, and 100 the least corrupt, and 50 is pass mark, Jamaica continues below 50. In fact, the score in 2021 remained what it was in 2020, 44, still well below pass mark. We fell one place in the rank. In 2020, 68 countries were ahead of us in terms of their ranking. Now 69, we fell one. We are ranking number 8 of 12 Caribbean countries in terms of the levels of integrity. We are ranked behind Barbados, behind the Bahamas, behind St. Vincent, behind St. Lucia, behind a number of countries, including Cuba. Only we're above in performance, only above Trinidad and Tobago, Guyana, Suriname, and Haiti. We're therefore the 5th worst in the Caribbean. This is not where we belong. And therefore, our effort now has to be for 2022 to redouble our efforts, to hold power to account, to have our people participate, to ensure greater transparency and accountability. Specifically, we need to make certain that the Public Bodies Management Accountability Act is enforced and the chronic breaches by public bodies of our reporting requirements need to be brought to book. Thus, such persons need to be brought before the courts and sanctioned. We need to ensure that the very, very strong and powerful regulations that have been passed just in last month, that those are actually complied with. We need to ensure that the Enhanced Security Measures Act comes before Parliament early in this year, 2022. We need to make certain that the gag clause in the Integrity Commission Act is repealed and that the Parliament allows us to know when an investigation is taking place. We need to make certain that the surcharge provisions in the Finance Administration and Audit Act, where persons found in breach of spending requirements of public money are required after appropriate investigation to pay back that money. This surcharge requirement was not applied between 2015 and 2020. It's now a recommendation which is being investigated by the Financial Secretary's Office. We need to make certain that those who continue to facilitate corruption, waste of our money, have to pay a price, not just resignation. And we, the people, need to do more as whistleblowers, as bringing information to the public authorities to ensure that they can act to ensure that our laws are properly applied. One very, very positive development in 2021 is that the Auditor General's report indicates that the number of whistleblowers, persons coming forward to report matters for investigation, multiplied sixfold during 2021. That needs to continue. MOCA needs to benefit. The Integrity Commission also seen an increase in persons coming forward with reports. That needs to be done at the same time as we provide greater protection to whistleblowers in investigating how that law, the Protected Disclosures Act, may be strengthened. So that's the first thing, to ensure that the efforts to make those gains continue. What this requires is for that emerging coalition of integrity to be strengthened. Coalition number one, the investigative journalists, they need to keep up, sustain, and deepen their work. Auditors from the Auditor General's department, secondly, investigators in the various anti-corruption agencies, MOCA, the Integrity Commission, the Financial Investigation Division, they need to continue and sustain their work. Those members of parliament and cabinet, too few in our view, need to sustain their efforts to stand up against those who feel that good governance is a luxury and that we need to continue the tribal abuse of good governance principles. Especially, we need to ensure that merit-based appointments take place in the public bodies, the 161 of them. And finally, perhaps most importantly, civil society organizations, the society organizations in the Consensus Management Oversight Committee, the community advocacy groups holding the building law, the building KSAMC to account, the advocacy network recently formed, JAMP, all of us need to redouble our efforts. We in NIA pledge that we shall continue. As we approach our 10th anniversary, we were registered in 2011 in March. As we approach that 10th anniversary, we pledge for our part to do all we can. We thank the Jamaican people for their high regard of our work, our private sector contributors, our international partners for their continued collaboration. Even as we appeal earnestly for more support to strengthen our efforts to help to hold power to account. But in all of this, we need to remind ourselves that teaching to which the cabinet was participating earlier in 2021, where they saw and learned in a module, and I quote from the PowerPoint presentation made to the cabinet, quote, "The responsibility for corrective action to effectively confront and combat corruption in any country begins with the country's leader, its cabinet, its government, its lawmakers. It doesn't end with them, but it begins with them. We remind our leadership of that political will is needed. We hope as well the professional will of our investigators and the social will and participation of our people shall ensure that 2022 has us moving forward to that 50%, to that 50 mark, so that we no longer tread beneath the water of integrity. So thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate your attendance and we look forward to any questions or comments you may wish to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Monroe. Well, we've heard it all. We're 70th in the world. Daniel, not good enough. Not good enough. And I want to just reiterate the thanks and commendation to our journalists, the anti-corruption investigators, civil society organizations, all of us who are playing an important role in addressing corruption in our country. So at this point, we're going to ask you to just give us a show of hands if you want to raise any questions or comments. And we see one question already in the chat from Dr. Kevin Brown. And Professor Monroe, Dr. Brown is asking, how do we achieve an increase in inclusion of the diaspora on boards in Jamaica. Any other questions? Just give us a show of hands, or you, of course, can put it in the chat.
While we wait, Rosalie, may I respond to that very, very important question? One of the issues I raised when I was in the Senate many years ago, 1998 to 2000, was the importance of closer collaboration between Jamaicans at home and Jamaicans abroad. A resolution was passed and the diaspora movement, the diaspora office was set up. Since then, of course, that contribution of the diaspora has been immense in terms of contributing to families and households. I think some $2 billion is now what we benefit. But beyond that, the diaspora has the capacity, the competence, and the willingness to play a much more important role in our everyday governance. And that's where Dr. Brown's question becomes very important. Two issues. One, it has long been agreed by both political parties, but not fulfilled, that our Senate should be made more representative. In fact, the 2016 manifesto of the Jamaica Labour Party promised to see the inclusion in the Senate of 3 non-political independent members from civil society and the diaspora. Last year, the regulations in the Public Bodies Management Accountability Act, which was passed, provides for different groups to nominate persons to be put, into the database of potential members of different boards. It includes trade unions, women's organizations, etc. We strongly believe that the diaspora should be one of the groups empowered to make recommendations for competent persons to be in that database and to serve on our boards. And that is a recommendation we would make to our Minister or Ministry of Finance and to the Financial Secretary's Office, which has the oversight responsibility of compiling the database for persons to be appointed to boards. Can you imagine if we got the expertise of the diaspora on the Integrity Commission, on the Financial Investigation Division, the National Works Agency, the National Water Commission, how much more we would have the potential of benefiting from those who love their country and would wish to do more. So I thank Dr. Brown for that question, and I would urge Dr. Francis, who I believe is still with us, to make that representation in support of NIA to ensure more targeted contribution by the diaspora in areas that would impact good governance.
Dr. Francis, I know you had your hand up. Are you withdrawing your question or you want a chance? Yes?
Question at all. It was a quick statement that I had to make to say thank you for the opportunity to share this platform with Dr. Trevor Monroe, yourself, and all the dignitaries that are here. So I won't call names, of course. I think it's long in coming. We have been having dialogue for quite some time. We appreciate the support of NIA. We appreciate the support of CMOC in particular, Distant, and many others on this platform that we have spoken to. We would like to have more dialogue, in fact, with you as to how we could improve this collaboration, collaborative event, so that we can make it more positive and moving forward, and increase what you've already done. I'm so elated by the success you've made, in spite of the fact that we're still not that far on the index. We're moving in the right direction, and the journey of 1,000 miles, of course, begins with a single step, and you have taken all of those. And I want to also say you can rely on our support going forward, because we see the value in your support and everybody else who's represented here, because it is important for us to put our heads, hearts, and hands together for our country, Jamaica. It is time people forget that we do not think that we're not Jamaicans, because we're here. We're not here by choice, many of us. And I also want to say that it is important to understand that there's so many resources within the diaspora that can be utilized to assist Jamaica in so many different ways. I'm going to be on 99.3 Conrad O'Brien today, and I hope persons will listening to some of the things that we want to thank all of the representatives from the diaspora who took the time out this morning to be here. Thank you very much. I'm not going to hold up your
Thank you so much, Dr. Francis. Judana Murphy, you have your hand up, and then we go to Lloyd Distance and Job Nelson. Judana?
Pleasant morning. Prof. Monroe, you have spoken about the gains and the deficits over the past year, but what are some of the possible reasons Jamaica has made little movement on the CPI?
A very good question, Jordana. I think very simply, as in other countries, bad governance and corrupt relationships and arrangements benefit powerful persons, powerful politicians, powerful private sector persons, and sometimes citizens themselves believe they have a vested interest in behaving corruptly. So what we have to do is to build a coalition of the vast majority who do not benefit from diversion of public funds into corrupt pockets, but who suffer because the roads are not properly repaired, contracts are awarded to political friends instead of competent contractors, the water supply system is not what it should be, the police themselves have to do more to get rid of the corrupt from within their ranks. So that's what is required. The few who benefit, some to the extent of vast riches as revealed in 2021 with the Pandora Papers, very powerful people in developed countries, many of them the center of money laundering and illicit enrichment. We need to mobilize, we need to build the public awareness in Jamaica, as indeed in other countries, to ensure that we become an irresistible force to get more good governance, more equality before the law, less favoritism and partisanship, so that more of the funds, that $100 billion which we lose every year, can go to early childhood education, to pay our public servants, and to provide better infrastructure for communities, particularly in rural areas. And once the people increase their understanding that their lives could be so better improved, that more investment would come to Jamaica if investors didn't have to pay money in order to get a permit, the more I think persons will come forward, as they are coming forward now. I mentioned in the respect of the Auditor General's report of 2021, that whereas in 2020, she had a very few whistleblowers, this multiplied sixfold in 2021. We need to continue that momentum so that we dislodge and hold to account the corrupt persons who continue to benefit from our underdevelopment and from our poverty and the levels of inequality.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you. Lloyd, Distance?
Thank you, Prof. Hamilton. Good morning, all. Just a comment, and in fact, the question I was going to ask, I think, is included in Jordana's, so I won't ask my question in the same way. But I want to start off by thanking Trevor for his leadership of the NIA, his strident and unhesitating advocacy for what is right and for reduction of corruption in Jamaica. It's been, it didn't rise almost 10 years at the helm of NIA, but certainly want to commend, recognize that, and the work of the NIA in particular. In Trevor's overview, you noted several things. He noted several things, and I flag, great that the PBMA has passed, but we need to ensure implementation takes place. I believe that becomes the next biggest step for us to track in that regard. But the comments made in regards to universal wealth, unexplained wealth orders, Trevor, and I would add the Bribery Act to the list. I didn't hear you mention that. I believe are two important pieces of legislation to move forward. The reason why I was going to ask the question is that we have really good institutions, MOCA, the Integrity Commission, the Auditor General, And our legislations, I mean, by far, I believe, outstrip anybody else within this region in terms of the legislations that we have. So I was really wondering what was, that elusive reduction, why we have not been able to achieve it. But that was the question that was asked by Jordana, Prof. Hamilton. So unless there's a different answer to the elusive reduction, Trevor, I will accept what you gave to Jordan.
Thank you for that, Lloyd. And I really want to, at the same time, commend your leadership of CMOC and the important role, even more important role that shall rest on your shoulders and all of us who are part of that coalition for 2022. I would only add one thing perhaps to my answer to Jordana, and that is that where political will is not what it should be, where it is fractured or weak, professional will, technical competence, commitment to doing what is right, whatever the cost of it, amongst our public officers with the responsibility for enforcing the law becomes that much more important. And we see that in so many of our public agencies, but others are lagging. And we have a role to play. We've done over the years many training sessions with public officers, investigators, prosecutors, sensitization of appeal court judges and judges in the judiciary. So that is what we need to get more done. And we're happy to see that there is clearly a growing tendency of public officials to stand up and to enforce the law. Sometimes you pay a big price, but doing the right thing sometimes has that particular cost. But the main thing is to get our citizenry more active, more alert, and more supportive, so that those who continue to engage in corruption or colludedly corrupt will have to pay a price if they are politicians, and if they are private sector persons, will have to be exposed and dealt with according to law. So thank you for that comment, Lloyd.
Thank you. Let's move on now to Job Nelson.
Yeah, it is actually Job and not Job.
Sorry.
Professor Monroe, from the Jamaica Observer, I should say. The Jamaicans on a whole are believed to be corrupt. Having said that though, are there any indicators, what are the reasons that are driving people to come forward to report corruption now? Anything you pick up as the main reason, or some of the reasons?
I think, Job, that part of the reason is that more and more Jamaicans are seeing that corruption is not only wrong, important as that is. In fact, the survey that was done a few years ago of students in high schools between 10 and 19 years old found that they were extremely well aware of right and wrong, but less inclined to make reports. I think what we're seeing now is more and more persons recognizing that reducing corruption will benefit them in ways that they had not perhaps perceived before. And if I refer to one of the groups that have developed and doing sterling work over the 2021, the householders, the citizens associations, especially in Kingston and St. Andrew, they are now seeing that this, so to speak, growth and development, which all of us want to see, has to be in accordance with law. If it breaks the Building Act, if it gets illicit approvals for building and permits, multi-story buildings, violating covenants, what those citizens are now seeing is that they have a vested interest in coming forward as they never did before in order to ensure that the law applicable to real estate development and approvals is actually observed. So when you see that your personal interest is being harmed by corrupt acts, that I think is what is accounting for more people becoming whistleblowers, for more persons standing up. Now, for example, the Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporation, can you imagine? They have applied for an injunction to stop a building, a multi-story building, going up in breach of regulations which they themselves may have been complicit in approving in the past. So we're seeing that the public officers are being pressured appropriately to observe and apply the law by citizens becoming more aware of how corrupt acts impinge negatively on their survival. And if more of our young people are unemployed, understand that one of the impediments to greater investment in Jamaica is the level of corruption, then more of them would get engaged in saying, look, we have to get more action to punish the corrupt.
Thank you, Prof. Monroe. I certainly want to endorse that and to recognize the presence of Dr. Patricia Green, who's been doing outstanding work in this area, writing in the articles in the newspaper, etc. Really important work that needs to be done. I see Dr. Brown's hand is up.
Hi, thank you, Professor Hamilton. Good morning, Professor Monroe. I'm Kevin Brown. I'm the UK North representative on the Global Jamaica Diaspora Council, and I also chair the Council's working partnership group. Thanks for your answer to my earlier question, but I have a follow-up as well, because oftentimes when we talk about corruption in Jamaica, I notice the focus is more on mega corruption and certainly corruption within ministries and agencies. I hear less talk around lower level corruption, which is actually quite pervasive within Jamaican society. So examples would include buying your driver's license, paying for your car to pass its fitness test, bribing a civil servant for services that perhaps you should receive for free, or bribing a traffic cop. I don't hear us, maybe it is being spoken about, Professor, and I haven't heard, but I think those what I call lower level corruption are actually the problem for the most part across a wider section of society. And oftentimes I think because we focus so much on what the political class are doing in terms of corruption at that level, we forget that, the ordinary man on the street is also having to overcome several challenges as well. So I just wanted to know if you're looking at lower level corruption and what steps can be taken to diminish that problem. Thank you.
Very good question, Kevin, and very important insight. The truth is that normally we make a distinction between grand corruption, which is responsible for siphoning off, as I said, billions of dollars, trillions of dollars in terms of the global losses, and in our case, billions of dollars as a result of the combination of organized crime and corrupt actions. And that is important. But at the same time, we ought to pay attention to what you correctly described as the everyday corruption, what is perhaps wrongfully designated as petty corruption. It's corruption, and corruption is corruption. But obviously, the losses and the impact vary according to the dimensions. However, in the case of the small corruption, the corrupt acts take place every day, I make one or two comments. One is that more needs to be done to re-socialize our people into the negative impact of those kinds of actions which seem to benefit you, but ultimately harm you. When a guy buys a driver's license and goes on the road, often he's responsible for the horrendous figures that we have in Jamaica of deaths arising from traffic accidents, and so on. When people are certified who don't have the competence, whether it's an electrician or otherwise, that has a negative consequence that we need to be more aware of. The re-socialization, however, also needs to include our young. And in that context, NIA has introduced what we call integrity clubs in schools. Not enough schools, and obviously the fact that we now have mixed modalities of teaching, face-to-face, not as it used to be, has disrupted much of that teaching extracurricular of the difference between right and wrong. Where the youngsters themselves lead the clubs, they ensure that the lines for the tuck shop isn't broken by somebody who has a favorite, and that right is recognized. So the re-socialization is very, very important. Public awareness building on a broad scale, which we intend to strengthen in 2022 once we get the resources, because that's pretty expensive. The television ads that we used to run when we were better resourced. What that does is that let the people know that bribery, that corrupt acts do not pay. And in that context, we have seen some results in that the Latin American Public Opinion Survey, which is done regularly, found that the decline in tolerance of bribery in Jamaica has been significant. Because it was over 30%, over 50% in 2006. The last measure in 2018 had it down to 30 or less percent. So making people more aware is important. And finally, ensuring that there are greater efficiencies. If you don't have to wait for a month to get a passport, then there's no point in trying to bribe a public officer to put you at the head of the line. And happily, our passport agency is one of those agencies with deficiencies, but improved efficiency. You can get a passport now in 24 hours with an expedited approach. Why would you need to pay an irregular bribe to anybody if you have that levels of efficiency? So yes, greater public awareness, more re-socialization of our young people to show that they not only need to know corruption does not pay, but they need to report it when they see it. And finally, increasing the efficiencies in the provision of services to the public so that people don't have to be tempted to pay a bribe. Of course, that's not the reason for grand corruption. The people who are very wealthy, they're not looking for efficiency, they're looking for paybacks. So thank you for that question, Kevin.
Thank you. Well, we just have about 8 more minutes left, so we're going to take one, possibly 2 questions, and then we wrap up. And I see one question in the chat. How would you, Professor Monroe, how would you react to the government's intention to postpone local government elections, which are due to be held next month?
Interesting question. I think that elections really and truly ought to be not one of our priorities at this time. In fact, the question reminds me of commitments that have been made over the years by both sides of the aisle. And indeed, in the 2020 manifesto of the governing Jamaica Labour Party, one of the promises made, and we hope will be kept, is that the constitutional review to be begun in 2022, and we see that there's a minister now appointed to deal specifically with constitutional reform, is that business of fixed election dates, so that the general elections would not be called at the whim and fancy of a prime minister when he or she sees it as in their convenience, but would be fixed so that everybody knows when the election is. Obviously, emergency provisions would have to be made so that if there's a crisis and an election can be called or should be called, so be it. And so as well with the local government election, there should be provisions, and there are provisions to postpone elections in circumstances where we have a crisis, as we do now in Jamaica, with the COVID-19 Omicron Delta variants, both here, and we're now running at positivity rates of well over 50%, which is 10 times what the goal should be at 5%. And in that context, of course, we believe that local government elections should not be a priority, but that all the authorities at the municipal level and otherwise should be focused on encouraging our people to get vaccinated, reminding our people that over 95% of those who become seriously ill and are in hospital and ultimately pass away regrettably are people who are unvaccinated. That should be the national effort to deal with the crime, which is now approaching not just the kind of statistics that were in the top 5 globally, but levels of brutality and just unimaginable murders. We need to come together to focus on that, as well as the COVID, as well as the corruption. The 3 C's, COVID, corruption, and crime. not local government elections now. I'm not sure if I've lost you, Rosie, but I'm not hearing you nor anyone else.
I'm hearing you, Trevor. I don't know if you are hearing me.
I'm hearing you loud and clear.
I think it must be Rosalie.
Yeah, I think Rosie's mic or the connection may have been disrupted. Well, while Rosie recovers, if there's anyone else who wants to ask a question.
I had a quick follow-up, Professor Monroe. Now that you've
Okay.
announced the corruption index, my corporate head is thinking, well, you'd want to put in place an action plan to meet a new target, right? Which takes you above the pass mark, etc. And I don't know who leads that, right? Is it you? Is it the government? How do you craft an action plan to bring down corruption so that you are year on year going up the corruption index, you know?
I mean, you're so much on target, we need you here in Jamaica now. And I know you'd wish to be. Let me say two things about that. The Integrity Commission of Jamaica, which is a government body, independent, is charged with the responsibility under the law to develop a national anti-corruption plan. And it's charged to do so in consultation with appropriate bodies, and that would obviously include National Integrity Action. But at the same time, we can't wait on that. NIA has its own action plan for 2022, and our great need now, given the necessity to press harder, to do more in terms of advocacy, do more in terms of public awareness building, do more to get more whistleblowers to come forward. Our big need now is to get more fuel in the tank, more financial support to carry out the kind of integrated marketing program that is needed, and to ensure that we have the resources to help the anti-violence programs in the communities. We're going to be embarking on resuming some of those. We cooperated and partnered with the National Youth Council of Jamaica last year in a number of communities, and we hope to do the same this year. But the financial support is really crucial, not just for NIA, but as well, I know, civil society organizations in Jamaica and of course our region, where we work with our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Guyana and Barbados. That is a big need. And while we do what we can, we will do much more in terms of implementing the action plan with more support financially as well as otherwise. So thank you for that. The action plan is very important to integrate the various initiatives which are growing each week and each month.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Thank you all for the questions. I apologize for the internet problems that we've been having, but I'm just going to ask Daniel to just make a few comments to wrap up, and then Trevor, we give you the last word.
Thanks to everyone for attending. I think we all know where we need to be. We need more political will. We certainly need to have greater individual will. And, you know, we have the answers. The question is, are we prepared to do what is necessary? And once I heard we all speak, I can't help but to recall our pledge. And I don't know if you remember that line in our pledge that says, I promise to stand up for justice, brotherhood, and peace, to work diligently and creatively, to think generously and honestly. I think within the context of our pledge, we know exactly where we need to be. For me, it's a disappointment that we are not leading the Caribbean where we should be in terms of being that nation that looks at integrity, looks and values brotherhood, recognizes the importance of peace, and thrives to get rid of corruption. And I think perhaps our mandate for 2022 is, let's not wait for the government, let's not wait for the people in the high society, the echelons to do it. Let's get our own home, our families, our friends, our communities together, and let's make it happen for 2022. It's absolutely impossible to expect civil society entities like the NIA by themselves without the grunt work of you, the individuals who joined us today, to make it really possible for 2022 to break the 50 mark. Prof says 50. I'm dreaming that we'll be able to get over that mark because I think we have it within us and time come. We're tired, we're frustrated, and many of us are hungry for better. Whether you live here in Jamaica or you're overseas, there is no reason why we can't come together and make it happen for 2022. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for the time. Over to you, Prof, for your final words.
And thank you for those remarks, Danielle. It shows that the younger members of our board, such as you,
come back with that again,
have so much to contribute. You put it perfectly: peace, brotherhood, and justice. Can you imagine if our parliament were living up to its constitutional mandate to pass laws for the peace, order, and good government of Jamaica, where we would be? But as you say, we can't wait. We have to do what we can, where we are, in whatever way we are able to. And the responsibilities for NIA are great. They're greater in 2022 than they were in 2021, particularly in ensuring that the gains have been made are strengthened. The regulations which will reduce the level of cronyism and nepotism and partisanship in running those 161 boards, which dispose of contracts, somewhere in the region of over 20,000 contracts, valued at over $167 billion, that those bodies are managed in the way that some of them are very well, which shows that the competence is there. We just have to have more of us doing the right thing. We will do our best, but we'll do even better with more support. We value and treasure the regard of the Jamaican people for NIA, and both at home and abroad. We treasure the support that we get from our international partners, many of whom are here. We are very uplifted by the priority being placed on anti-corruption, announced and publicly done in the United States, which, by the way, arising from previous shortfalls, has fallen significantly on the Corruption Perception Index 2021. And it's perhaps, if my memory serves me right, at the lowest it has ever been in terms of score and rank. So we are standing still, but we're not falling. We have to move forward, and we can and will move forward with more of our people doing more of what was being done last year, coming forward to blow the whistle, doing what the citizens associations are doing, exposing and standing up for what is right and what is lawful, and applying the advances that Jamaica has made. And one last point I should mention, in that I think Kevin mentioned the issue of the private sector. We need to mention that they have a role to play. And one of the roles they can play is to support the strengthening of Jamaica's campaign finance legislation. It's a pioneer in the Caribbean, but it cannot be right that the Jamaican people do not know who gives how much big money in exercising their right so to do to which party and which political leader. That is important for us to be able to hold to account those who would breach the legislation that we so want to uphold and to strengthen. So I want to join you, Danielle, and Rosalie, to thank you both. I know how busy you are, Attorney Danielle and Professor Rosalie, and more so, all of those, huge attendance at this virtual press conference, and we are really happy about that and hope that it indicates greater support for what NIA stands for and for doing the right thing and building peace, brotherhood, and justice in Jamaica, land we love. So thank you all. We appreciate your presence and your questions and comments so very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
Thank you so
all.
much.
Thank you so much. Time come.
Now ease up.
Let's do it. Thank you all. Now ease up. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.